Act naturally. An analysis of Ringo Starr's handwriting. This video is the last in my set of handwriting analysis videos about the Beatles. Here we will look at the handwriting of Ringo and see what it reveals about him as a person. The first thing to point out is that Ringo Starr, real name Richard Starkey, was very sickly as a child and missed out on huge chunks of his formal education. This will explain away many of the mistakes he made in spelling and punctuation. Secondly, because Ringo was not really known as a songwriter, it has been difficult to find sufficient examples of his handwriting over a lifetime. He also gave up autographing things for his fans many years ago, and this too didn't help. Let's start by looking at a postcard that Ringo sent to his grandma back in 1960, during the Beatles' last tour of the clubs in Hamburg, before settling down to work with EMI and embrace Beatlemania. First, let's consider the zones of his letters. Their order of importance, according to their sizing, is lower zone, then middle zone, and finally upper zone. The large retracing of the lower zone letters is particularly interesting. It indicates repression of painful childhood trauma. Ringo spent very long stretches of time in hospital as a child. He nearly died on a number of occasions. I was chronically ill myself for 27 years, so I well understand how long-term illness can affect the psyche, particularly if those health problems strike when someone is very young. Clearly, these physical health problems made a deep impression on Ringo's psyche. The middle zone of Ringo's handwriting is a little dwarfed by the lower zone and sometimes the upper zone too. This habit is present in the handwriting of people who quietly suffer great feelings of inferiority. They underrate themselves, even if on the surface they might seem boastful. There is also retracing in the upper zone. This time it indicates repression and inhibition of an intellectual kind. This trait is seen in the handwriting of people who deny themselves much of their own creative, spiritual, and intellectual capacity for fear of failure or ridicule. Pleasingly, the baseline of his writing is straight, but this could just be due to the unusually ruled lines of the postcard. Straight baselines demonstrate a sense of composure in the writer. When self-induced, the straight line shows orderly and stable thinking and the work of someone who is dependable and perseverant. The extreme slant to the right seen here is also fascinating. It means the writer is not just emotionally unsettled, but actually volcanic in the nature of their reactions. By this I mean someone who is passionate, jealous, easily offended, very demonstrative with affection, but also susceptible to hurt. They can love and hate with equal abandon, and are even capable of hysteria. These are people who can wear themselves out with the roller coaster ride of their own emotions. They are strongly influenced by their own likes and dislikes, and tend to plunge headlong into relationships and causes. The pressure of the ink is average, bordering on light. These sorts of writers are sensitive and impressionable. They will be easily dominated by a stronger-willed person. The size of the writing is still within the range of what would be regarded as average, albeit at the top end. However, his handwriting varies in size, particularly on the vowels. We saw this characteristic in John Lennon's writing too. It indicates a writer who can be caught up with their own feelings to the point of being self-centered, indecisive, and childish. Although, even with all this moodiness, they can still be oddly charming. Writing narrow letters with wide spacing is another sign of someone who appears very outgoing on the surface, but is inwardly uptight and cautious with his feelings. The slightly erratic spacing between the words extends this concept. It is seen in the writing of someone who is social and happy one minute, and then withdrawn the next. To make matters worse, they rarely realize these qualities within themselves. The speed of his writing is a little faster than average, with few adornments, which is good. It's a sign of intelligence. Rhythm is good, but form quality is a bit poor and a bit erratic, with strokes and shapes that are a mixture of arcade and angular in formation. Arcade writing indicates a secretive, guarded and protective person who is resistant and proud. Angular lead-ins are a sign that the writer has been hurt or cheated in the past, and as a result they are skeptical, possibly hostile, with much energy spent thinking about the past. Despite the oddness of the slant and size of the letters, the ovals are correctly formed. This is good. It means Ringo can be honest but discreet. The high degree of connectedness reveals compulsive tendencies. The small letter D is high-stemmed and retraced, showing a quiet pride. He has small T-bar crossings, which reveal some lack of willpower. The I dots are mostly over the stem, which is positive. It's the sign of precision, a good memory, and concentration. His capitals are big. They are a sign of trying to make an impression and have a sense of showmanship about them. Ringo displays the argumentative P here, something that we saw in John Lennon's handwriting. Ringo's small letter Y's and G's show him to be sexually repressed at this point in time, with some resentment towards his current partner. As ever, his signature matches the rest of the text with no embellishments, which is a sign of honesty. The writing here is much as before, with one big difference. There are huge gaps between the words. Bear in mind that Ringo is writing to his current girlfriend here. This is like saying you love someone and you want to be near them, while simultaneously crossing your fingers behind your back because you don't really mean it. This letter shows Ringo is screaming for his own space. We can see the personal pronoun I here too. It's a bundle of contradictions. It's very narrow, with double right-facing endings. It's upright, and it's given lots of room too. Let's unpack all of that. Here Ringo is trying to project a head-over-heart stance, while simultaneously resenting some imagined imposition. He lacks genuine confidence, but outwardly projects an abundance of it, and all the while he just wants his own space. Also note that there is an instruction to buy the new record of his band. The instruction is in small block capitals. We will see the return of his print writing at the end of this slideshow. This postcard, addressed to an old friend of Ringo's, was sent on an important date, the 14th of November 1962, the last day the Beatles played Hamburg. Here the wide gaps are gone, so clearly he felt happier to be around his friend Roy than his last girlfriend. The other positive sign is the maintenance of his margins. These demonstrate an understanding of social boundaries and a willingness to give space to others. His rising baseline indicates that he was feeling optimistic. For me, though, the really interesting thing is the signing off. Ringo Ritchie. Ringo is what his friends called him. That was the label to which he personally identified. Ringo was his new public persona, and obviously he was trying to adjust to the idea of this. In the confusion to line up these two identities in his mind, he writes both names. Next we have a couple of notes written to fans. This first one shows the bass line starting to become sinuous. This demonstrates his nervous energy. He is trying to be diplomatic. It also might be the sign of his increased flexible morality. The retracing of his upper and lower zones are beginning to give way to tight loops. This means he was beginning to feel less inhibited and repressed. His personal pronoun I also changed to one showing a lot more emotional balance and confidence. This is also the first time we see his new autograph, which I will discuss alongside his legal signature later on. The letter form quality has improved here, and the size of his letters has stabilized, along with the baseline. There is still some retracing, but here Ringo was more likely to form loops instead. Clearly he was feeling good about himself at this point, which is an interesting contrast. His band members were all struggling to cope with their fame psychologically, but Ringo's belief in himself was given a huge boost by being famous. For Ringo, his fame alleviated his serious feelings of inferiority, or at least it did at this point. Whilst George was writing While My Guitar Gently Weeps, he asked Ringo to write down the words. I have cropped out the beginning and end of the lyrics, which were written in George's handwriting, and just left the main middle section that Ringo has written. I think it's important to note that Ringo is writing this after Paul has been killed and replaced by Billy. The subject matter of the song lyrics he is writing is the mourning of Paul's death by George. For the first time, we see Ringo's writing using a mixed slant. The words controlled you and I don't know how are unusually reclined, a sign of dwelling over past events. The quality of his letter forming has also regressed. There's stress and emotional instability shown here that wasn't there in the last two examples. The personal pronoun I has changed once again. Now he's more likely to use a stick figure I. This is a sign of great independence and an awareness of the culture that he has found himself in. In short, Ringo has just had a massive wake-up call. Ringo's actual legal signature is R. Starkey, whilst his autograph reads Ringo Starr. Naturally then, the two are very different. The only thing they have in common are the initial letters R and S, which are written in a similar style. The autograph is the more flamboyant of the two, but that is the nature of autographs. They are pieces of showbiz propaganda. On a positive note, they are both legible. This demonstrates an ease with oneself and the desire to be honest. The deep plunging G in the lower zone of the word Ringo indicates determination and firmness, maybe to the point of aggression. This mirrors the Y in Starkey, which, by finishing unnaturally to the right, shows aggression, sarcasm, and contrariness. The underlining and accompanying pentagram star of the autograph are an attempt to frame his public persona with a, perhaps literal, touch of magic. The lines dart about like the waving of a magic wand. This is a symbolic spell being cast upon the reader. Ringo probably didn't invent that autograph. I imagine someone behind the Beatles machine did, but they made sure that he followed through with this appropriate moniker. Lastly, let's look at a memo left to an assistant sometime in the 1980s. I cropped this from a longer note that included another message written by Ringo's second wife, Barbara. First of all, who leaves notes to other people in pink? I own pens of every colour, but then I studied art as well as music. Unless the writer is a visual artist of some kind, I think it's a bit odd for a man over 40 to even own a pink pen, never mind leave notes to employees using one. If you don't think that's odd, try to find a pink pen in your house right now. Unless you too have an interest in producing your own artwork, you probably won't find one. I know that since the 1990s, Ringo has generated computer-based artwork and even exhibited some of it, but that was long after this note was written. The next thing to observe is the print writing. We saw in the letter to his old girlfriend Doreen that Ringo left an instruction to her in print in the middle of his normal handwriting. Possibly this is done to underline the point he is trying to communicate. Possibly it is done in order to make his handwriting clearer. Generally, though, habitual plain print writing that isn't merely done to make a message clearer is a sign of self-centeredness, someone who is too concerned with the matters of daily life. This can be the result of feelings of guilt, which blocks channels of self-development, resulting in a complicated person who can be quite sophisticated and immature all at the same time. The margins come to his rescue, though. The space all around the message is balanced, demonstrating an awareness of social boundaries and some sense of self-control. And so, that concludes my analysis of all the Beatles' handwriting. I hope it's been interesting and maybe helpful to some of you. I struggled to find enough examples of Ringo's writing to complete this video, so I hope this will be sufficient. As I analysed Ringo's handwriting, I kept seeing comparisons to John Lennon's handwriting. This made me wonder, was part of the reason that Ringo was selected to be in the Beatles due to his childhood trauma and his generally emotional instability? I suspect the controllers felt that John would be a good candidate for manipulation, and perhaps they felt the same way about Ringo too. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.